that is that we're talking seasonal use with regards to trapping, and there's no doubt that some of these areas are, they have a lot of traffic and they have a lot of activities in them, but the seasonality of the trapping, I think, mitigates that to some extent. So I don't equate it to what we've got in the Las Vegas Valley or in southern part of Washoe County and those areas. So that's why I'm not sure that I wasn't voting for 96 hours, not to have 96 hours for those reasons, because I don't believe that they're heavily used to the point that it warrants us to take action in that sense. So did somebody else want to share what they thought on the 96-hour stuff?
I'll start again. On the 96 hours, there was some discussion that in 1981 the legislature looked at this, and we went from a week-long trap check down to 96. And at that point, there was some discussion brought forward that during that session they even talked about 24 hours statewide. They talked about 72. They had multiple things they looked at, and it decided on 96. And my comment to that was I believe the legislature looked at it and acted very prudently on that. 96 hours accommodates taking one day off a week for trappers, and then depending on how you work it, you can trap a Saturday or Sunday and one day during the week, and you can stay in 96. Even if you go to 72, I don't even like 72 because it doesn't afford that type of flexibility for a trapper. And my comment to that is, I've been told I'm worried about trapper convenience. No, I'm worried about the wildlife resource state of Nevada. We had 1,400 trappers plus last year. We're not going to decrease the number of trappers we do through these regulations. We're going to change their distribution. And if we suck down to 72, 48, whatever it is, I think we're going to have an impact on wildlife resources closer to population centers and have a different impact on resources away from those population centers. We have sensitive species, pygmy rabbits, sage grouse. We have other things going on. We have red fox invasion in northeastern Nevada, and I believe Nevada is built different than any state in the United States. I see a lot of testimony come through, emails come through that all the other states do this, why can't Nevada do this? During the conversations, I made it a point to say I've worked in all the western states there is in the past 7 years, and a lot of my stuff is in smaller towns, and I spent a ton of windshield time driving up and down through these different western states, and none of them are built like Nevada. All these other western states have water distributed more evenly around the state, whether it's Oregon, Washington, California. Water's key to any type of development. You can't have a town in the middle of the Nevada desert without water, except for Las Vegas, I guess. But with the lack of water, we have lack of development, we have lack of people. So I have these huge expanses, much greater, multi-times greater than what we have in the other western states. And in recognition of the distance between population centers and the vast, very empty areas, I'm not looking at it as a trapper convenience issue. I'm looking at it as a wildlife issue and keeping trappers distributed evenly throughout the state. And I truly believe if we even went down to 72 hours, we'd be doing the wrong thing for the wildlife resource in the state of Nevada in some of these areas. So that's why I like the 96 hours, and I think it was very prudent of the legislature when they put it in as 96 to allow the ability for distribution of trappers.
So Jeremy or Karen?
Yeah, I guess I'd agree with a fair amount of what Commissioner Robb said in terms of distribution and getting out away from areas that either are populated or heavily used, and I think everyone's definition of heavily used is different. I know there's been a lot of discussion about kind of the humane aspect of this and what is more humane for the wildlife. And I think different people look at that differently, and I really struggle in terms of how you define that in terms of a set number of hours. I just don't know that one number of hours ultimately in the end makes that big a difference, and I think people are spread all over the spectrum, and I'm not sure how to process that, I guess, in my own mind in terms of how you make that work cleanly, or how you define what hour time is any better than another from that aspect. When you look at it in terms of the harvest distribution, I think you could definitely have a profound effect depending on how short or how long you go. And then there's some other confounding factors. Traps that are designed to cause immediate death are exempt. And do we want to cut down the statewide time and encourage more use of that, which in turn could increase our conflicts, or at least catastrophic conflicts, with companion animals? And so I guess I've looked at this as kind of a big spider web, and I try to play through the various scenarios, and every time I pull one side of the spider web, the whole thing shakes, and it's been a real challenge for me. But I guess the biggest thing for me coming down to it was in some of these rural areas where we have less potential for conflicts, a wider distribution to me just seems to make more sense from a population standpoint.
So I think out of, considering that John sat on the committee, John, is there anything that we haven't said that you wanted to add to that particular?
Yeah, thanks, Dave, for the opportunity. John Sullivan, for the record. Yeah, it certainly was a grinding process. We did have some light moments with Jack Robb behind the wheel going down the freeway at 75 miles an hour, and with a blowout that was extremely well handled, so it wasn't all bad. We had some adventures along the way. My take on this stuff, I support several of the motions. I support the education motions. I think there's a gap in the public perception of wildlife management, not only trapping but hunting as well, that could be addressed well through better education. Trapping education too, mandatory trapping education, I support that. The motions in Elko, I support that. Voted for that. For those game units, the rural units, I supported that. For Clark County, I supported the vote for the firearms discharge area. I thought that the county had already designated that area for special rules. Hunting's not allowed in there because hunting is with firearms and you can't discharge firearms. So you have a no hunting zone. It does incorporate some desert, some rural areas. It's not all urban. It's actually quite a large area. So I did support the motion for changes to trapping in the firearms area. On the demerit points and the private property changes, I thought those kind of came out of the blue. We were all focused on visitation. SB 213 was about visitation, and then one day I got in the mail the agenda, and there was demerit points and private property changes, and it seemed to me it was a little bit like piling on or something. I thought those are very worthwhile subjects, but not the right time and place. I think we should have stayed on the subject of visitation. The maps of Washoe and Clark, again, I support the one map of Clark, which is the discharge area. I thought the other areas, I don't know the Washoe area too well. It seems like quite a bit of land in there. I would think there's quite a bit of trapping in there. My biggest problem is I couldn't figure out what we're trying to address. Is it pets in those areas? If it is pets, they're not in a trap that long. If you're a companion animal, the animal's out of the trap within 10 minutes. It's not there for 24 hours or 96 hours or 48 hours. So I couldn't figure out how we're addressing that. If it's a humane issue, I couldn't figure that either. If it's humane, it's inhumane in a rural part of the state as it is in the urban part of the state. So I just couldn't justify those larger maps in Clark, the larger map in Clark, and the map in Washoe.
I think everybody pretty much knows my stance on this. I think 96 hours is way too long. I will agree with Dave on that. I look at other surrounding states, and they have reduced their, they've reduced their hours. But I think for me, representing, I don't represent sportsmen on this commission. And it was pretty clear since John, when Jack set up this committee, added the two people, that when he added me, he also added John. And I think that we were supposed to be a counterpoint to each other, John taking the trapping viewpoint, and I took the non-consumptive user viewpoint. I would agree that any time spent in a trap is too long. I think one of the problems that I ran into in terms of talking to people, particularly in southern Nevada, is that, we talked to them about reducing trap visitation time. And unfortunately, their view is that they didn't even want to talk about that for the most part. The people I talked to were, why do we have it at all? So you have a large viewpoint, a very distinct, this continuum of viewpoints on this committee. But I think it was very good. You had the viewpoint over here that John has expressed, and the Nevada Trappers Association has expressed, that you shouldn't change anything, everything should stay the same, all the way over to the idea that 24 hours, the idea that 24 hours, and yet a lot of people didn't even want to have 24-hour visitation time. So this has been a very difficult process. For those of you who attended that 8 or 9 hour meeting in Las Vegas, many of you are here from Clark County, you know what I'm talking about, and I think that we tried to work through this. Probably nobody's going to be happy. You can see the votes that were taken. But the thing about this is that we did reach some consensus on some things, and I think that's the most important point. We all weren't happy, but we reached some consensus, and I think that's what these two maps are all about. And I hope that the commission members who did not attend those meetings will understand, and understand the effort that it took to get to this point.
And I'll just say one last thing as we move forward. I think the way that SB 213 was written, we've heard John just referenced it just a minute ago, and I think that there's a lot of folks have questioned why, what it is that we're trying to address. And there's a number of folks that are very clear on what it is that we're trying to address. And, the legislature probably didn't do us any favors the way that everything was written, and I'm sure that it was written that way on purpose. But the fact of the matter is, we've had an awful lot of conversation about it. We've brought it to this point, and this commission has to start its process of determining what it wants to do from this point forward, and that's really about where we're at. So we didn't really, John kind of wrapped his up, I think, in one shot, and I talked about the 96 hours. We didn't really get into some of the other conversations about the Reno Sparks area. For me, I was largely in pretty good shape with that. There were comments from the public that had asked for that to be expanded out into some of the northern areas just a little bit further. So you can see an 022 right there. There are some areas out there, and there's some populated areas out in 021, and there were a few comments about extending that map out into those areas, but the committee really didn't spend a lot of time talking about it. This is the map that kind of hit the ground, and it didn't get modified much from that point. So, and then down south, I looked at the visitation frequency. I think Jeremy summed it up, and he can make comment on it. We were asked to consider visitation frequency to address specific issues. And when we're addressing something like conflict, visitation frequency outside of prohibiting trapping may not resolve a conflict issue. because animals are going to get caught in traps if there's trapping. I mean, the potential's just going to be there. And so visitation frequency may not be, manipulating visitation frequency may not be the best way to handle that particular issue if that's what we need to do. So I did look at visitation frequency as a tool to manage where trappers went. I mean, we've heard it discussed with regards to the 96 hours, the distribution. Okay, that 96 hours was an important component of possibly distributing trappers, and if we reduce that we might bring them into these areas that are more heavily used and more populated. Okay, so in my mind, the opposite could be true too. If we're having conflicts in areas near populated and heavily used areas, then reducing visitation frequency to encourage sportsmen or trappers to extend into areas outside of that, that should work likewise. And I looked at the demerit points as an additional, as a way of keeping that system honest. That's just how I looked at it. It's time to, so I looked at the visitation frequency not as a perfect tool to address everything, not a direct way necessarily, but as a potential tool to manage the distribution, and that's largely where that's largely where I'm at with it. There are other ways that we can handle it, but it wasn't in the context of SB 213, the discussions we were having, so those things never hit the table.
Commissioner Macbeth?
Okay, well, after listening to everything, I guess where this is boiling down for me is, first of all, and am I able to talk about both the number of hours and the maps as well? Or is everything open at this point?
Yeah, it's open.
Okay. So this is my take on the hour issue. It seems to me that SB 213 presumes 96 hours is the time period in areas other than, right now it's for all areas, but wanted the commission to look at areas with high use, with populations and high use areas. And so, the discussion of 96 hours in the context of the entire state, I don't know why we were having those discussions. It seems to me that that's presumed. Now, once you get to these high use areas, I heard that there was discussion about animal welfare issues with regard to the time animals are set in traps. And that makes no sense to me in the context of SB 213, because the animal welfare issues are going to be the same whether you're in close proximity or outside close proximity. It makes no difference where you're at. It's the amount of time in the trap. And so I don't think that's on the table. I don't think unless the members of the committee correct me, that there was any real testimony taken on the science that's involved. I believe there's some late emails that came in indicating that there have been some studies about animal stress levels in traps. And if the committee didn't consider any of that, I don't see how that's on the table. And so, and then there's comments about, well, you didn't want to be accused of considering trap convenience, and I understand that. But in my mind, really what the issue is what is a trapper capable of doing within these zones that we're going to create that are high use? And let me explain that a little further, because one of the comments of one of the members of the committee at the CAB meeting in Las Vegas was that they were actually looking at the 24-hour period as a way to basically exclude trappers, that they shouldn't be there trapping. And I immediately had a major heartburn about that. And the reason is that we have already dealt with the issue of where there is no trapping. We already have a regulation for that. And to basically use a 24-hour period as a way to keep trappers out. If you wanted to have a regulation to reconsider the no trapping zones, then that's how that should have been agendized. And we can deal with whether there's trapping or not trapping in a particular area like we have done before, but we've already been there. So now the question in my mind is what is 24 hours? And is it realistic to assume that a trapper can check traps every 24 hours? And based on my discussions and everything I've heard on this issue over the last few years, I find it very difficult to believe that trappers can do trap checks every 24 hours. There are too many issues. There's too many potential issues regarding, weather, whether the trapper gets sick or has some other issue come up in his life. And it just seems to me that 24 hours is unworkable. And so, in my mind, it has to be something other than 24 hours. And I've heard a lot of, different testimony, and unfortunately, it seems that the parties basically took very extreme positions, one 24 and one, staying at 96 every place. And we didn't really get to any discussion of other areas, other times. So, it leaves one to, have to maybe arbitrarily, determine something. In my mind, I can't see the period be any less than 48 hours. I think a trapper would have enough time if something comes up to do that. And I know that the comment I'm going to get is, wait a second, it's not 24 hours, it's calendar day. Okay, well, that's an interesting issue. Calendar day. When I first heard it, I remember I asked Chairman Robb, and I didn't understand how it worked. I remember talking to Commissioner McNinch about it, I believe, and I didn't understand how it worked. And then Commissioner Lane at the CAB meeting tried to explain it. I didn't understand how it worked. And then finally, at the CAB meeting, between a discussion between CAB members John Hyatt and John Sullivan, I finally think I understand what calendar day is. And in my mind, that could be anywhere from 12 hours and 1 minute to 23 hours and 59 minutes. And so depending on when the trapper checks the trap, if he does it late in the day, he's going to have a compressed time, and if he does it early in the day, he's going to have a longer period of time. And I just believe that the exigencies that come up, as to, checking traps, aren't going to be related, to these periods. There needs to be a fixed period of time in my mind. We already have in the statute 96 hours, and so whatever this period of time we agree to should also be in hours as opposed to calendar day in my mind. So that's where I am on the time period. But one thing that I want to make clear, and I made this point in another meeting, is that I look at the time period being related to the area. The bigger the area, the more time. The smaller the area, the less time. But I'm thinking my floor is going to be 48 hours. Now, I will agree with the committee, portion of the committee's recommendation, or the one vote that they took, that the firearms area should be an area that is where there should be a shortened trap check time. I like that for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's also the basis of our exclusion, because our exclusion excludes certain areas within certain distances. And so and I hope I got it right. It's been a while since I've looked at the definition of the no trap zone, but I think it is tied to the firearm zone area, and maybe with some extension up in the areas of Kyle Canyon and Lee Canyon. But I have major concern about going beyond the firearms area. And the reason is those are federal public lands. Now, a lot of them already, it's my understanding, already have restrictions on trapping. For instance, I believe there's a restriction on trapping in the Red Rock Canyon National Conservation Area below 5,000 feet. So trappers already cannot trap there. But for the areas above 5,000 feet, seems that the BLM is perfectly comfortable with trappers being there. And in fact, in the Clark County Conservation BLM's resource management plan, it allows trapping. These are federal public lands. They're multiple use lands. Trappers should be able to trap there. And so when you couple that zone with 24 hours, which I believe is in the guise of a ban on trapping, I have a problem with it. So, and I believe I don't know what the situation is with Sloan Canyon, if there's any restrictions there. But there's a lot of areas here that are just, there are some use areas, but there's also a lot of country in here that is fairly remote. The Corn Creek, the area between the outskirts of Las Vegas and Corn Creek, that area, that right against Desert National Wildlife Refuge, pretty remote. The areas along Highway 93 and 286, there's very little activity out there. And so I got problems with that. And then all of the river mountains, the portion of Unit 269, I believe might be in the Lake Mead National Recreation Area, and that might be a restriction on trapping as well. And so I don't know why we'd be even considering these areas for shortened trap check times if we're not allowed to trap, if the trappers aren't allowed to trap there anyway. So that is my thoughts on Clark County. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about Washoe, even though I look at this map and I have concerns about using units. If there are remote areas within the units, I would, and if somebody would point me in that direction, I would support, smaller areas there, if those are federal public lands.
Commissioner Drew.
I'll address part of that. And I didn't vote for the northern Nevada map, and in part it was because of some of the things Commissioner Macbeth touched on in regards to public land. I really, and I know Commissioner Robb and I disagree on this point a little bit, but I really struggle with designating wilderness areas as a high use area. Now there might be some specific areas inside of wilderness, but the reason it's a wilderness is because it's untrammeled by man, essentially. And so just philosophically, I struggled with that. I think the intent of the committee really was the thought that if we shortened the duration, the visitation duration in these areas, and I think we probably did a pretty good job of identifying the heavily populated and heavily used areas in terms of hunt unit boundaries. I think then the concept was you'd kind of try and use a disincentive to be in there and try and incentivize trapping somewhere else. And the thing I struggle with on that is, again, the exemption I talked about with the traps that cause immediate death. I just struggle with that. And I ask myself, are we actually going to create a bigger issue than what may already exist? So that was one aspect. I really did have some concerns with using the hunt units. And Commissioner Robb said, well, I'm all ears if you can come up with something better. And to be honest, I really in the north struggled with that. I don't know. If you look at, we talked early on about the U.S. Census data. It sounds great on paper until you see the maps. And if you think hunt units are convoluted, take a look at those. And so I think the committee struggled with that and grappled with that and kind of used hunt units just because it's things that the trappers and sportsmen are familiar with, almost by default. And maybe Commissioner Robb can add on there. But I really struggle with some of the same points that Commissioner Macbeth made.
Okay, Commissioner